Let's see now how to define custom functions in Python. To define functions in Python, we use the def statement and then the name of the function. So let's say variogram equation, and then we can add arguments to that function. So let's say shape and range. Note that range is a reserved variable. We saw that we can use range to create a range of indexes. So in this case, it's best practice to avoid using the same name. So let's use RNGE to represent range inside our function. So the first thing, and we end the function statement with column. So similarly to the if loop, everything that's inside the loop, the function definition, is defined with a tab. So the tab will define the context of that function. Before we start writing a code, it's common practice to define a description for that function. And this is what we call docstring. It's just the documentation of the function. So let's say generates the variogram function. So that would be the documentation, and then we can start writing the code for the function. So let's do print gamma equals shape, and then let's say a divided by range. So this function takes the shape argument and the range argument and prints this statement on screen. The first three letters of the shape, and then the range, the lag distance a, divided by the range value. So if I run that cell, nothing happens because this is just defining the function. So in order to call the function or use the function, what we can do is to call it. So variogram equation. So now if I press Shift Tab, what I will see as a docstring is the string I typed above. So if you want to provide more description of your function, you can do some more description. And this includes explaining what each one of the arguments are. So now if I check with Shift Tab, it has some more description. So yeah, it's good practice to always describe whatever is inside your function and what the function does, so that the user that's using this function, even if it's you, will be able to look and remember what is going on. So now let's pass some arguments. So let's say spherical, and then the range 20. And if I run this, it will print on the screen gamma equals the first three letters of spherical, and then a divided by range. So that's exactly what I see as the output. So now let's create a new function. Let's redefine this function. Let's clean up a little bit. And let's add some calculation. So let's say that C, which is the contribution of the variogram, it's going to be 1 minus nugget. Note that now, after defining this function, if I do call it, I'll have a problem. And the problem here is that nugget is not defined. So I used this nugget thing here, but there's no nugget defined anywhere. So I could use a nugget as a parameter of this equation, or of this function. But if I define nugget outside, so 0.1, this becomes a global parameter which is accessed inside the function. So this should now work. So if I run this function, and I forgot to add some more information in here, so let's use nugget plus and then C times shape. All right, so let's run it again. Now we can see that the value of nugget, even though it's not an argument of this function, can be accessed inside that function because a global value for nugget is specified now. If now I do make the nugget one of the arguments of this function and try to run the function, it will complain because now our nugget is a argument and I expect a argument to be provided, but I haven't provided that argument yet. So let's say that we are gonna use a 0 nugget. And this function is already printing whatever is inside the function. So let's take a look now also. Let's print the value of the global nugget. So let's say global nugget equals nugget. And now we can just run. So what happens now is that because nugget is an argument of this function and I provide 0 as a nugget, when I'm inside this function, it uses the provided nugget, which is 0. But the nugget that has been defined here, it's still available. It's the global nugget, and the value of that nugget hasn't changed. So it's still 0.1. So if you recall, once I added nugget here, I was required to provide nugget on my function call. But we can specify functions where certain arguments are optional. So in that case, let's modify this function to take a second range. So let's say range 2. And in this case, I will give it a default value of known. Known is usually used when some argument is optional and the user may or may not provide. And then I can specify a contribution to have a default value of 0. And in this case, even C2 is optional. The user may or may not provide. It doesn't necessarily mean that it will not have a value. In this case, it will have a value, and the value will be 0.0 if the user does not specify. So now let's modify this function a little bit. So let's copy this to a string. So this will be the initial string that is stored on this string. But then if range 2 is provided, or in that case is not known, then what I'm gonna do is to append to this string another string, which is gonna be plus C2 times, and then the same shape, but now it's range 2. And then after all that, I can just print the string. So what this function is doing is if the user does not provide anything, it will just print the first string that we had before. But if the user provides some of these arguments, especially range 2, then we will append the second structure to the string and print that. Let's see what happens now. So this first function call should just result in this first string. But then if I make a second call, and that second call has a range, there's an error in my code. I'll just try to run and we'll see where it is. Oh, here. There you go. So the first function call will print the first string, and the second function call will print the first string appended with the second. One thing that I have forgotten here is that we should subtract C2 as well, because the contribution of the first structure should be 1 minus nugget minus the contribution of the second structure. So if I run this now, it will print on screen the first string, in this case, because I haven't provided range 2. And in the case I provide range 2, it does go inside this if statement, and this part of the string is appended to the original string.